This is Stephen Sloan. The date is May 30th, 2012. We're with Mr. Birney Chick Havey at his residence, 2201 Nassau Drive, Seabrook, Texas. This is an interview with the Texas Holocaust and Genocide Commission's Texas Liberators project. Thank you, Mr. Havey, for sitting down with us today. I'd like to go back and get some of your family background. I know you were born in St. Louis, Missouri, but if you could tell me a little bit more about your family and growing up there in St. Louis.
Okay, do you mean my ancestors?
Yes, sir. I know you've done some genealogy.
Yes.
Yeah.
We have records that my ancestors were Prussian soldiers and they fought in the Revolutionary War. Their name was Koch, by the way. And they were given after the war was over as a gift 100 acres of land and a mule in Pennsylvania. And they migrated over to Hannibal, Missouri by the Ohio Valley, and that's where my recent ancestors are from, and that's where my father was born, in Hannibal, Missouri. And he met my mother in St. Louis, and they were married. And I have three sisters, or had three sisters, and we lived in North St. Louis, kind of the German area of St. Louis.
So what was your father's profession?
My father was a salesman, and he sold ladies ready-to-wear garments, and at the store, in-store level. And I got some merchandising value from that because I used to help him with his samples, markups and materials and things like that.
So he wasn't on the road, he was there at a store in St. Louis?
No, sir, he was a traveling salesman.
Oh, he was?
He traveled in Illinois and Missouri.
So did you get a chance to go with him on the road?
No, I never did. He'd pack up his little Chevrolet with suitcases in the back and head out, not every week, but he'd make trips about once a month to different towns around in his route, around in Missouri and St. Louis.
Well, I know you were young, but did he do all right? Did the family do all right during the Depression?
We did okay, yes. I remember that bums would come to my mother's back door, not just for a sandwich, you know, and my mom always had a sandwich for them. And she used to laugh, and she said she thought they marked the sidewalk with an X or something because sometimes they were frequent. But everybody was poor. We thought we were poor, but we were not that poor.
Well, did you have any work? Did you take any jobs on when you were younger?
Oh yes, I always had a job cutting lawns, and I used to get 25 cents to cut a whole lawn. And that's trimmed too, with a hand trimmer and a hand push. So in the winter I shoveled snow and built fires for people. Instead of automatic things, I'd build a fire for them coming home. I had 4 or 5 people like that. And I saved my little dimes and quarters and a Calumet bakery can. And sometimes my mom would get a little short on Saturdays, and if I'd have somebody over, I'd have to go get a dime's worth of sausage and a loaf of bread for Saturday lunch until my dad got paid.
Well, when you had a little money to keep for yourself, what'd you do with it?
That brings me to banking. And we had a place in St. Louis called the Mound City Bank and Trust Company, and it was on Natural Bridge Road at Taylor. And they furnished me with a bank, a little fat barrel bank with a lock on the bottom of it. And I couldn't open it or shake out any money or anything like that. But Saturdays, maybe once a month or every other month or so, I'd go down to that bank teller and he'd have the key and he'd mark that little deposit 70 cents or 80 cents in my bank book. And my account grew to about $18 to $20. And don't you know that bank went busted and I lost my little money? That taught me something about banking.
So the bank run, you didn't get in on the bank run to get your $17 or $18 out of there.
They had a run, but not for, they just went closed. I don't remember that they did have a run, but it was at the time all the banks were closing.
Yeah.
That would have been, I guess, in 32 or so.
Well, did you spend any of that on yourself for entertainment?
No, not really.
Yeah.
Not ever.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, I went to a carnival once, yes. Yes, I do remember that.
Well, what are some other memories there in St. Louis? Now, were you in the city?
Yes.
You were in the city growing
in
up?
North St. Louis,
What are some memories that stand out from you?
Well, we lived in apartment flats across from the public school stadium, and we had the facility of a full baseball park and everything where they would let the kids play there at all times unless they had some activity going on. And we enjoyed the sports, and we had teams picked, and we hated the Catholic schools because they had two teams, and we were just, we would pick teams out from that play.
But you liked baseball.
Yes, we were only about, maybe 20 blocks from Sportsman's Park in St. Louis, and they had a knothole gang. And after school got off about 3 o'clock, and we'd hurry down to the ballpark, and then it'll let us in free, and we'd see the end of the game, the Cardinal games, Dizzy Dean and all those old ball players.
Now, you got to explain. I know what you mean when you say knothole gang. What do you mean by that?
Well, it was depicted from little boys peeking through the board fence of a ballpark and peeking through the knothole to see the game where they couldn't get in. That's why they call them the knothole gang. And they issued cards too.
Well, I know you have talked about already your kind of the family tradition, military tradition in the family. Was your father in the military?
No, my father was not in the military. My uncles and his father, and from the events that I understand, we had people die in the Civil War, the Second World War, or the First World War, and right along the line. And my Uncle Frank, of course, my dad's brother, was a sailor. But we weren't a military family by any stretch.
Well, I know you decided to enlist in 1942. Can you talk a little bit about that decision?
Yes, I wanted to be a pilot, and we enlisted on the Air Force Reserve, and they were taking a long time to go to pilot school. So every Saturday morning we'd go down to the recruiting office down at the Federal Building in downtown St. Louis and see in what position we were, if any. And finally one sergeant got a hold of me. He said, well, why don't you join the Army unassigned, and then you'll be assigned to the Air Force and you'll get to go to pilot's training school. So I took his advice and signed up, and the next thing my butt was on a train going to the mule packs in Colorado Springs, Colorado.
And that recruiter was nowhere to be seen.
Never.
Well, now, what were you doing I know that was 42, so you were out of high school. What were you doing at that time?
Well, I went to Washington University
Okay.
for a while, and I don't want to go back to the people I started with, but some of them never got out of college. But for about the year and a half prior to that, we enjoyed the college life.
What were you studying there?
Business administration.
Okay. Yeah. Well, so the decision to now, one memory that you probably, can remember well is Pearl Harbor. That hearing the news of Pearl Harbor. Do you remember where you were and when you heard that news?
Yes, I do. I had 3 jobs during that summer. And one, I sold suits for a tailor-made suits. And the other, I worked in a liquor wholesale house stacking cases. And at night, I had a job at the Esquire Theater out in Clayton, Missouri. And on that Sunday evening, that's where I learned of Pearl Harbor. In that theater. I remember the janitor, he didn't even know where the Philippine Islands were.
Do you remember what you thought or what you felt?
Mm, not really. It was of news interest, you know, not, it, we hadn't come to an anger point or anything like that.
Yeah, wasn't personal.
Yes.
Yeah. What were you doing at the Esquire Theater?
I was an usher.
Okay.
That was cute. We'd have little flashlights that would help people down to their seats in the dark, you know. We had a little uniform.
And the cap.
Yeah.
And the cap and all. Yeah. Well, 3 jobs, huh?
Mhm. I was making more money than my dad.
All right. Well, let's go back to you being transported in 1942. You've enlisted, and you're in the service. And where do you go from there?
I went down to Jefferson Barracks to, our folks took me to the pickup point, my sister and my mother. And from there I went to Jefferson Barracks in St. Louis. And then from there we boarded trains for Colorado Springs, Colorado,
Okay.
Camp Carson.
And so you did your basic at Camp Carson?
Yes, it was with the 89th Division, 69th Division.
Well, can you tell me a little bit about your introduction to military life?
Yes, I kind of got a kick out of the tests that the Army gave you, and I guess I was more mechanical inclined. And I had a fellow sitting next to me, and he copied off of my mechanical test. And the joke was that after we ended up, he ended up head of the division motor pool, and he didn't know anything about mechanics, and you know, he had copied off of me. So, and I ended up at Division II as a statistician.
So before we get to that, what was basic like?
Basic training was routine. It was okay for a kid. I was strong and it didn't really bother me.
Were they doing accelerated basic at that point?
I hadn't heard of that. It
Well,
was just standard basic.
Standard basic,
training,
yeah. I know later they're doing briefer, they're moving people through
Right.
quicker through basic. So
No, they had a regular division training course, and a program for that.
now you said you were assigned as a statistician.
Yes, at division headquarters.
Okay.
And I soon got out of that and got with a regular outfit.
What sort of work did you work in that area very long? What sort of work did they have you doing as a statistician?
Well, we had all the files of all the personnel in the division, and they had a form. It was about an 8x10 form with sticky holes around the side of it, and they would plunge a dagger in, or a pointed thing in, and pick out certain categories you wanted, and or they wanted, and you try to keep statistics of. We made graphs and plans for that. With that.
Exciting work.
Yeah, it was not too good.
So you got out of that and you're reassigned to what?
I went down with the 222nd. Let me see. No, sir. That's when I went to parachute school.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what are some of your memories from parachute school?
Well, it was a long, rigorous course, exciting and very interesting. And we went through the different stages of jump school, A, B, C, and D. D is the last jumping. And I enjoyed it. Everything was running. We ran, but we were in marvelous shape,
Mm-hmm. Do you remember your first jump?
Yes,
Can you take me through that experience?
Well, yes, I can. I didn't have any particular fear of jumping, and all you wanted to do was hurry out the door and do things right. Do the right step and stand at the door and do it correctly. But one of the biggest thrills that I had, and I still have, is after your parachute opens is seeing that beautiful C-47 fly away in midair with nothing holding it up. And if you happen to be turned that way, and see that go away, what a feeling that is. And everything is quiet, and you can talk together as you're going down.
That's as close as you got to the Air Corps, right?
Yeah, that's it.
So you're in jump school, and you're training through jump school, and then could you take me a progression from there, if you would?
Yes, well, I had a lot of trouble with my legs, charley horsing,
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I had some muscle breakout in my right gastrocnemic muscle, and I finally had to transfer out of that to an infantry school, an infantry outfit. But I wanted to get in the war and get to Europe, and the only way I could do that is when I went with that 42nd Division, which was ready to go. So that's when I joined them.
Well, now it was around this time that they reconstituted the 42nd, right?
It was already a division when I went there,
Okay.
but they were still in basic training. I went through basic training again.
Congratulations.
Well, it was a piece of cake,
Yeah. Can you share a little bit of I know you know the history of the 42nd. Can you share a little bit of the history of the 42nd?
Yes, it was kind of a political division because General MacArthur had been chief of staff under General Pershing, and he was attached with the 42nd Division, and they kept more records. There were more eyes watching the division, I guess. They call it the Rainbow, and it was supposedly in the First War a conglomeration of all states, that type of division, an infantry division.
And that's what it ended up being in the Second War.
Yes.
It wasn't from any particular location. It was there were guys in the division from everywhere.
From everywhere, yeah.
Yeah.
That was at Camp Gruber, Oklahoma.
Okay, that's where you gathered 42nd.
That's where the division
I
headquarters,
see.
the training took place.
Now, this is when were you assigned to the 42nd?
In 1944.
1944. Okay. And so what sort of exercises or maneuvers are you doing at that point?
They're getting the final touches on any replacements or the people that have come in late. The division is ready to go to Europe. It's ready to ship out.
Now, at that point, had you been assigned to an anti-tank company?
Yes.
At that point?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And so with that, what sort of training or...
Well, at that point, they had 37 millimeter cannons, and you learn to shoot them and load them and aim them and, shoot tanks with them, set them up, and do everything with it. But then before we went to Europe, we got 57 millimeters, which were much bigger and a better gun.
Now, are you working with, I'm trying to remember the name of the tank destroyer, an M10? Is it an M10?
I
Okay.
don't recall the numbers, but the tank destroyers were on half tracks with 155s.
Yes.
They're
Okay.
artillery.
Okay. Yeah. And of course, you didn't know if you're going to, at that point, if you were going to North Africa or if you're going to Europe.
Not to a certain point until we got on the train,
Yeah.
really. And we headed for New York.
Yeah.
That gave us a little hint.
That was a dead giveaway.
There's a little hint.
Take me through that transition to New York.
We rode on Pullman trains, and we loaded at Muskogee, Oklahoma. And it was like a 2 or 3, 5-day trip. I don't recall, but it was, longer than 3. And we were well fed and everything, and we couldn't get off the train. But when we got to Camp Gruber, I can't recall a camp in New York, but we were assigned to barracks, and And we got passes to New York City, and I got to go into New York City.
Tell me about that. Yeah, that's a long way from St. Louis.
Yeah, well, we just hopped on a train and went there, and I went down to Times Square and looked around and had a few drinks, and we just kind of enjoyed it, and finally went back home a little dizzy.
I get a feeling there's some details in there you're leaving out a little bit.
There are.
We don't know who's going to watch this at some point. Well, I know you were finally, you shipped out in December of 44?
I think November.
November. I know you disembarked in December, but you shipped out for France in November of 1944?
Yes.
Okay. And how did, talk about the transport over to France?
We went over in a rather large troop ship, and it was a captured German ship from the First World War.
Oh, wow.
And it was, I don't want to say comfortable, but we all had bunks, slung bunks down in the holds, and it was crowded, but we kind of enjoyed it, I didn't get too sick, and we just enjoyed the ocean. We went through close to South America because we went south in the Gulf Stream for quite a while, and the trip was pretty warm. And that late in the year, it should have been cold. I learned better coming back.
Was it pretty peaceful passage over there?
Yeah, we went and landed at Marseille, but we went through the Straits of Gibraltar, and we got to see North Africa and Casablanca and things like that. And we landed at Marseille.
Well, tell me about your first impressions of Europe.
Well, when we first got off the ship, we were carrying our baggage, a barracks bag, and our packs and our rifles, and we were drunk trying to keep our, on the dock because we had been wallowing around in the ocean so long. But then we marched up to a campsite, and camped out and dug our holes and got ready and kind of prepared, and they were bringing the rest of the equipment in to join us. But we came earlier than the division, our regiment, for some reason.
I see. So you came in earlier and waited?
No, we didn't wait. They shoved us right up the Belfort Gap.
Okay. Good. The first of many holes you would dig in Europe.
Wow, yeah.
Did you have any encounters with the French?
Yes, I got to go to out of that camp, I went to a village saloon, and I remember I had not a bourbon and 7-Up, but I guess it was a brandy and 7-Up, and there was a Senegalese soldier that came in after me, and we're sitting at this little bar, and he had a beer with 7-Up in it. And I looked at him, and they looked at me. But, that was it.
Yeah.
We bought some of their cheap wine and things like that.
That area was fairly secure, though, when you came.
Except for air raids, we're getting some air raids.
You were still getting some air raid. Were those pretty regular?
Yeah, all night.
Yeah. As you got into Europe, did you realize some things that you hadn't been prepared for as well in your training?
Well, we started up the Belfort Gap through the Rhone Valley, and that was right after the 8th Air Force had been strafing where the Germans were pulling out, and that was a sight to behold, because mile after mile after mile of their equipment, horse-drawn, and horses and oxen in the field, bloated up, and that's our first, but just for like 200 miles or 150 miles of it. Endless.
Well, I know y'all are, at that point, you're moving fairly quickly to catch up.
Yes,
Yeah.
they moved us in trucks, and then on December the 16th is when the Battle of the Bulge started, and that's when it started freezing and getting cold and snowing. Even we're up in northern France. What do I want to say? up by Reams.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Did you come up with any strategies to deal with the cold?
No, we had our overcoats, you know, and regular gloves, and our helmets and our little caps to pull down over our ears. One of the things when we were trucking up to the Third Army, we were assigned to Patton's Army to relieve the bulbs at that time, and we were all riding in trucks, and for some reason, we had number 10 cans, and I put dirt in and got some gasoline, and we had a little fire in the truck. Well, with it closed, it was pretty comfortable. But the next morning when we got out, we all were black, you know, with soot. It was comical.
It was probably worth it to stay warm.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Well, take me through, if you would, kind of your experience in that December part of the bulge.
Okay. Well, we got up to a certain point, and we knew we were getting close to the fighting because you could hear the artillery rumbling, you know. And they tossed us out, and we were advancing with tanks, and I guess would have been towards England. But anyhow, we got into some shooting and some ground scrapes there, but that was for the 18th, about the 19th to the 20th. And after we relieved the bulge, after we made contact with the division, I don't remember the division, it was an ad hoc division, but they put us in trucks and took us back to Strasbourg. And that was about a 2-day trip. And we were there when the Battle of Bitch, I guess the Germans were just attacking across the Rhine at Strasbourg.
I see.
And we got into some of the old French Maginot Line forts. It was amazing.
Yeah, well, tell me about that, if you
Well,
will. Yeah.
they had kind of a tower. You'd go in and go downstairs, and there were about 4 flights down, and they had a railroad track, a small gauge railroad track running all through, and it was kind of warm. It was comfortable, but we didn't. We found some potatoes in there and cooked some potatoes, and their latrines were funny because we were just a hole in the concrete, and they had a place where you put your feet, you know. And we got a kick out of that, but they're rather crude.
Mhm. Well, so how long are you there in Strasbourg?
Well, if I'm not mistaken, we were there either Christmas night or Christmas Eve.
Okay.
And as I remember, we were just doing patrolling work,
I see.
and I remember we were getting mortar fire in, and I remember digging in the side of, I had to dig out cobblestones to dig by this curb, and the Olympics or some games were there, or a big meeting by here not too long ago. It was at Strasbourg. I remember those cobblestones at that street. But the Germans had blown the bridges across the Rhine.
I see.
They were attacking up north of us. We got into that later.
So you were dug in there on Christmas Eve,
Yes.
and was there a ceasefire for Christmas
No.
Eve? No?
Well, there wasn't anything happening, but there
Yeah.
was no known ceasefire. You know, nobody said don't shoot.
Sure. So you were dug in that position, patrolling in Strasbourg, and then when did you move on from that?
They pulled us right out of there, and we blunted the next German attack north of Strasbourg by Wingen and Zermoder in there.
Okay. And can you describe for me how the anti-tank companies were working at that time?
Yes, we were mainly attached to our battalion, and each regiment has an anti-tank company of their 3 battalions, 3 companies for each battalion, and each one has an anti-tank company in it. And we're there to protect against tank attacks. So we're always dug in the side of the road or positioned at a crossroad or something where we can get some flat fire into tanks.
Do you remember when you encountered live fire for the first time with German tanks?
Yes.
Can you describe that for me?
Yeah, a tank was coming down the road, and they saw us and they machine gunned us, but we were dug in, and we fired probably 4 or 5 rounds, and it wasn't a Tiger tank, it was a lighter tank, Mark IV or whatever, and we hit it on the side, and they backed up and they went another way. But the Germans always had infantry with their tanks. They protected them. They never, a tank alone is a dead duck. So, but that was our first fire, and
Did you feel like y'all had pretty good intelligence on German tanks?
no, we had none.
Yeah.
None. We didn't know. We knew one tank silhouette from the other.
Yeah.
The Panther and the Tiger.
But I'm assuming that this is knowledge that developed with each encounter.
Yes.
Yeah. So
We try to attack them sideways instead of frontal, yeah.
yeah. And what were some other tactics that developed that you would learn to use?
We had bazookas, and they were just in their, I don't say infancy, we hadn't trained with bazookas in the United States, but the bazooka was a pretty good weapon at that time, if you could get a side hit. And tanks are blind, they're really dumb. So I was never really afraid of a tank per se, unless it was running over you.
Yeah.
But that was it.
Trying to get the tracks off a tank or detrack a tank.
Our 57 millimeter wasn't really powerful enough to penetrate a frontal German tank at that time. We had to try to side fire if we could, but a lot of times you didn't have that opportunity,
Yeah.
nor did we encounter that many times too.
Sure. Were the anti-tank companies attached? You weren't attached to a tank battalion?
No,
Were you? No.
we're
No.
attached to our own battalion,
Yeah.
our regiment.
Okay. All right. So you're moving up in the bulge. When did you get a sense that things were changing with the bulge? That the tide was shifting a bit.
Well, at that time we were just infantry.
Yeah.
We didn't have our anti-tank guns or any trucks or anything with us. We were just infantry.
Yeah.
And we made contact with the southern flank shoulder of the attacking division of Patton's army, and that was our objective, to close that gap, and they took us on. I remember one thing about it though, is for some reason that next day we got the assignment to stack bodies. And they had 2.5 ton trucks there, and they must have brought all the German frozen, stiff, and we were throwing them up in the trucks, and there were probably 100 of them, 2-3 truckloads of them, and we were seeing how far we could throw them back in the truck, because they were stiffer than board, and only probably weighed 150 pounds, so 2 of us would swing them and sling them. But that was just an extracurricular assignment.
What was your? I'll ask this for people that were attached to the Third Army at different times. What was your impression of Patton?
I had no impression. We never
Yeah.
saw him or anything. I didn't know anything but what we read in the Stars and Stripes.
Yeah.
But everybody knew that he didn't care about casualties.
Yeah.
He was going to attack no matter what, which was not the worst thing in the world, I guess.
Well, I find vets that go either way, So once you're attached to the Third Army, at that point, you were getting your equipment, you're getting your supplies and your trucks and things that you needed for the,
Yeah, they were being assembled south of Strasbourg, unbeknownst to me. I didn't know it till later on, you know. Our division was just coming, the rest of it was coming over.
well, if you could take me forward from that point once you're attached to the 3rd Army.
After the Bulge, we were relieved from the 3rd Army and went with the 7th Army, which was the army that was facing northward. That's from Strasbourg north. And that was General Patch. And that was a different army. There were other divisions with that army. But that's when we went into positions, mainly defensive positions along the shoulders of the Rhine River above Strasbourg.
And so you were holding those positions, you were taking artillery fire from the other,
Oh, it's constant.
across the Rhine?
Yeah, and
Because I know the Germans were dug in.
yeah, mortar fire was probably the most frequent.
Did you learn to read the sound of a mortar?
No, you really couldn't. A mortar would be in on you,
Yeah, you could.
but an artillery shell, and they had a device they called a screaming Mimi that they fired, and they called it a naval wafer or something like that, and you could hear that coming in, and you could hear artillery shells coming in. Generally,
But you were dug in that position.
yeah, it didn't. We were under fire constantly, and you got used to it, I guess.
Yeah.
And some of them weren't all that, you know, maybe one block or 2 blocks away, or maybe 100 yards, or, you know, not every instant or anything like that, but frequently.
At this point, we had talked earlier about supply lines. Were you fairly well supplied at this point?
We're, yeah, really.
Yeah.
We were above the Bulge, above Strasbourg. A lot of times we were in a German barn or an Alsatian barn or a house, and go out in 4 hours out, 4 hours in. You know, so it was.
Well, talk to me about that routine of 4 hours out and 4 hours in.
Well, a division is set up on the main line of resistance, where you have your line, and in front of that line are listening posts, you know, where you're dug in front of it, and you're supposed to hear for an attack and warn the people. And usually you have a phone, a sound-colored phone. So it's just a static position, you know, and you go out when you can. If you're not observed, you're okay. And usually you have areas to go back to your hole where you won't be observed. And 4 hours on, 4 hours on. It was just bitterly cold, like 15, 17 below.
Did your feet do all right?
I had a little problem with them.
Yeah. I've talked to veterans that say, if I could just have gotten my feet warm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, we were lucky because we had shoe packs. Prior to that, they had their regular boots, those strap type of boots with the galoshes. But the shoe pack was a rubberized modern version of a hunting shoe, and had a felt liner. As long as you had a couple pair of socks on and you keep your toes moving, you're never comfortable, but at least you weren't freezing to death.
Well, so you're involved in these 4 out, 4 back. You're doing that, holding this position, this defensive position on the other side of the Rhine. Can you take me through that crossing when things broke and you crossed?
Probably the best thing I can tell you about is action. If you're patrol action, if you're
Yeah.
picked for patrols, you know, out in front of the lines to locate the enemy, or if it was a prisoner attacked or whatever. But that was constant going on. But other than that, we're in a pretty, I call it a safe position, but it wasn't. Every once in a while there'd be machine gun fire and things like that. But it was kind of a static winter position. until such time as the Germans started that attack. They called it Norwind, I think. And that was, they tried to break through between the French. The French were north of us, their divisions, whatever they were. I never saw them. But they tried to break through there, and they attacked through those areas. And we lost a lot of men in those attacks, like counterattacks.
Now, were there any British in your attached to your group?
No.
No. I always like to ask opinions of the Brits.
No, we never had.
Never, yeah. Well, so that western side of the Rhine, that western bank of the Rhine during that period was fairly secure for this period.
Generally inactive,
Yeah.
I would say.
Yeah, okay. Well, take me through when you moved on from that position.
I think probably that would get us into February,
Okay.
and we were ready for a general attack. And we were assigned to the point, and we attacked through the Harz Mountains. That wasn't in Bavaria, but it was in northern France. And we lost a lot of men there.
I've had veterans talk about the defensive position the Germans had in the Harz Mountains and how dug in they were. Do you remember work that the anti-tank company did there?
No, we were all on foot.
You were all on foot at that point?
In fact, they brought some mules up to take our wounded out. We had mule packs with us then. I remember we got a new replacement. One of our officers were killed. We got a new replacement officer, and he was kind of a heavy guy. I don't mean to say fat, but heavy. And we were attacking at night, and we were going up the side of this hill, and he made the mistake of touching one of those mules in the back, and the mule kicked him down the hill. He just went up and patted the mule, and he got kicked out, and we kind of got a kick out of that.
Well, I know at that point, that's near the Hart Forest, and so I know there's a period there where you're kind of in a defensive position again, and you're patrolling some. Is that right?
No, this was a general attack.
Was it general?
Yes.
Yeah.
And we kept going from then on.
Okay. And I know in March you break the Siegfried line.
Yes.
Yeah. Can you take me through that motion from February into March?
Sure. We I'd read about the Siegfried line from the newspapers when I was a kid, when Hitler built them in the Maginot Line. And little did I imagine I'd ever be attacking through it. And my company commander, Captain Waters, came in and he said, "Come on, we've got a patrol tonight." So our assignment was, and for some reason why him, to find where two bridges were. And there were just little bridges across an inlet. And that afternoon, we were laying up on top of a bluff overlooking the Siegfried line. We couldn't really see anything, they were camouflaged and everything. But our 155s, our Corps artillery, was constantly firing big shells, and they must have been coming close over our heads. And so they fired all afternoon, and that night was the attack. But so Waters and I started out along this road, and it was dark, and I remember the machine gun fire hitting in the steel posts. All our telegraph posts were steel, not X kind of steel. And we got to the bridge, and I was pretty close to him. He used me for a bodyguard, throughout the war. And I remember he's got a pistol. Here we're through the Siegfried, going through the Siegfried line. He's got a pistol. So I kind of told him, I said, "Well, you stay back here, and where I know where you are, and I slid it up, and both of the bridges were there. And we're getting some fire, but most of the fire was coming from our troops way on our left. And so the next, on patrol action, you get a tone and you can smell the German tobacco. And you know Germans have either been there or whatever, or you're getting close to them because you can smell that tobacco. And it's so unlike ours, but that's just one of the assets you gain. And so I found the second bridge, went back and got waters, and the attack had already started. And here comes the lead people down that road, you know, the scouts out in front. And we got the word back that the bridges were okay and they could tank across them later on. The next morning, they stopped us, our company, and the attack went on through us. And the next morning, we were there the sun was out, and there were about 4 GIs riding a road down the other side of that hill, and they were dead. But I don't know, they didn't show any blood or anything, you know, I don't know how they got killed. And then the engineers came up, and there was a pillbox, and we got to look at the pillbox and how they go in and, you know, side doors and the metal doors and the apertures, and they were about 6 foot thick. And we were running around with Bangalore torpedoes going to blow them up, you know. So they moved, the engineers came up with a truck, and we were there watching, you know, just kind of lollygagging around. And they shot off this, I guess, a box of TNT, and it just blew out the doors. So then they got serious, and they brought another truck, and they put maybe 10 boxes of TNT, and they turned that off, and it just boop. I think that's shown in that 40-second. It's just, you know, they just lifted that thing up a little bit, made a lot of smoke.
Still there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So you spent some time, I know, clearing that area, right?
Yeah.
After that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Were you facing organized resistance or just pockets of resistance?
Semi-organized.
Okay.
We were getting a lot of shell fire in, and it was tree bursts, and they usually burst down, you know, and they're pretty. They wound a lot of people or kill a lot of people. But we had some machine gun fire from a position, and I knew they were down in the valley, and I knew they couldn't hit us. And we're waltzing up the side of this hill, and here come 4 of those Germans, and they gave up, you know, and they had a lieutenant with them and 3 enlisted men. And we started getting some artillery fire in, and I remember that everybody was hiding and rolling around, you know, trying to get out of that artillery fire. And I noticed this lieutenant was just standing there, you know. He was a tough rascal. So I went over and said hi to him, you know, just didn't say hi to him. I just went over and looked at him, really. And but he was a well done guy. We lost Lieutenant Westbrook there. He had a piece of shrapnel in the back, and he was bleeding through the stretcher. And I went up to him, and I told him, I said, "Is there anything I can do for you?" And he said, "No." And I told him, I said, "Well, we'll see you later." And I didn't see him again until we met at St. Louis there. I never knew what happened to him. But we continued on, and we crossed that bitch Haguenau highway. That Haguenau was our objective, and some tanks, German tanks, caught us coming down the hill, and were firing straight into us. You talk about dig a hole fast.
What Panzers or Tigers or remember what
They were Panthers,
Panthers.
like medium weight tank.
Yeah.
And we were coming kind of in a row down the side of that hill, and they were firing straight into it.
Yeah. Well, I know we talked a little bit about German tanks. You know, I interviewed a tank driver who just talked about how formidable the German tanks were, armor plating, and how superior they were.
They really were.
So you moved back across the Rhine. I know you've
We
had
had-
several Rhine crossings in here.
Yeah, we crossed the Rhine at Worms.
Yeah, okay. Okay. And that, and is that when you captured Wertheim, and that was at the end of March?
Without looking at my
Yeah,
chronology,
I'm
I don't
sorry.
remember the names
Yeah,
of the towns
I
too
know.
much now.
I
didn't
it's
know 'em
hard
then.
to keep all these things
I didn't know them
straight.
then, I don't know them now.
Well, in this case where you're under fire from a group of German tanks and you dig into a defensive position,
That was only immediately.
that was
Yeah,
immediately.
they weren't there for 2 or 3 hours. We went on with the attack.
I see.
And that was the Bitchhagen highway, or
Okay.
road.
Okay.
They were firing. from there.
So a key,
That was our
highway.
objective.
yeah, to secure that highway, yeah. Now, you mentioned taking on prisoners. Did you notice that was becoming more common? Taking on German prisoners?
Not
Were you
yet.
Were you receiving a lot of German prisoners?
Not then. Yeah,
Not then. Not that early, not in March, yeah. Yeah, after securing the highway there, what was your next objective?
I think we got back on tanks, and I think I don't recall too much right there. I know we got our tanks came back, and we were riding tanks then.
At that point, had the pace picked up quite a bit?
Generally,
Yeah,
generally,
yeah.
we learned to loot.
Or liberate,
Yes,
as a lot of
Yeah.
vets call it.
we used to say a squad has 12 men, 2 men shooting and 10 men looting.
So what were you looking for?
Pistols, gold, cameras.
Did you, what were some of the items that you picked up?
Well, people don't realize what war really is, you know. They look at it, oh, taking this or going. We'd kick doors down, got to be expert kicking doors down, and you know. I remember I had a guy by the name of Rennick. He came as a replacement. He went to Illinois University, and he told me, he said, "Havey, will you teach me how to loot?" I said, "Well, there's nothing to loot, you know. You just go take what you want." And so about a month later, we were kicking down doors in a town and searching out, really, and getting under fire. And I went out, they were kind of long brick houses, and I went out in the backyard and opened the back door and went out in the backyard, and I heard yelling and screaming back there. And I looked across the fence, and Rennick had these people digging their own grave. He had found a Leica camera lens or something, and he knew they had it hidden in there, and he was trying to torture them into getting it. Not torture them, you know.
Yeah, scare them and
Uh-huh.
giving them, handing them.
So I was going to teach him to loot.
Well, I know a lot of this work is moving from little town to little town, this clearing work that you're doing. So, what were your interactions with the locals like?
We really didn't have and didn't see a lot of them because they were hiding. We were in combat. We weren't, you know, coming up later on.
Yeah,
And we didn't see a lot of them. But some occasions we would find food on the table, and we were always looking for food, you know, also. And I remember we attacked this one town, and we had some shooting, and we went around and cut off the town and came back through, and it must have been a Sunday. We never knew what day it was. And these people had a goose in the oven with dressing and potatoes, and just the meal was about ready. I remember they had milk too. And we sat down there and ate that goose and drank that milk and just had a good time. But it must have been their Sunday meal.
Well, now, I haven't asked you, I know you were wounded. Was that during this period?
No, it was
Okay.
before I was already back.
Okay,
I was wounded March the 1st.
okay, March the 1st. Can you tell me that story?
Yeah, we were attacking through a field, and you hardly ever go through an open field. You see in the movies they're walking across. You don't do that. And I happened to have to cut across this field, and I heard a machine gun, thump, 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 and it hit me and knocked my rifle, went through my hand, knocked my rifle, broke my gun, and a piece of shrapnel went in my arm. I don't know whether it was a piece of wood. It was a piece of metal because they found a piece of metal in there. And it really didn't hurt too much, you know.
How long did it take for them to get you back to get some?
I walked back.
You walked back.
Yeah, and they already had a medical tent set up, and about a mile or so, and they dressed my wound and sent me back to the next place, and I stayed there. I didn't go farther. They sewed it up and cleaned it out and sewed it up, bandaged it.
Give you any trouble?
Not really. You're aware of it, but you don't, not really.
Now, Firth, I know, is one that does stand out as far as the resistance that the 42nd met at Firth. So do you mind telling me about that?
Yeah, Firth is right next to Nuremberg, and Nuremberg was the ball bearing center, and I guess the 8th Air Force lost an awful lot of planes there trying to bomb the ball bearing plants and stop the Germans from machining. And we were looking out on a plane, and we had a real good panoramic view. We could see maybe for 8-10 miles. And we could see some of their 88 positions. And we were getting some mortar fire, but there was an air raid occurring, and I think there were A-20s. Our A-20 bombers were attacking, and there were parts of planes coming down, and it was the most amazing thing, just like it'd be in the movies, Not here, but you would see parts of planes, Sometimes you couldn't see them or whatever. And finally, we attacked Nuremberg that night, and we didn't have too much. Had some artillery fire and some mortar fire, and we got into the town, and the bridge was blown, but they didn't blow it all away. They could get a jeep across it. I think there's a picture on this. The damnedest thing you ever saw, getting across. But that was amazing because the Germans pulled out by the time we got across the bridge, and there was a big road with a median in front of it with nice trees all the way down there, about a mile I guess you could see, and they had a man hanging from each one of those trees, and it was amazing. I guess they were people giving up, and the SSers hung them, how long a neck will stretch out of your shoulders, and their necks are out that far. I found a guy that died a natural death in a coffin in one house, and there was a safe in that house, and it had the door open in the safe, and in that safe was a gold coin or a coin, and I carried that for a long time. I don't know what it was worth or anything like that, but it was funny seeing a person die a natural death.
Mm-hmm.
They have those real narrow coffins,
Mm-hmm. Well, how long were you in Nuremberg?
I don't know, we turned through Nuremberg. Firth was right next to Nuremberg, and we didn't really know it was two cities. They were almost together, as far as I was concerned. But we were riding tanks, and we were ordered, I think, to continue on our there wasn't too much resistance at Nuremberg.
So you weren't able to get tanks across the bridge there?
They had already had them across.
Oh, they had.
They bypassed it. Yeah.
Okay. And so you move on to the battle at Firth, or taking Firth. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Can you take me through that?
You mean Nuremberg?
Yes.
Well, there wasn't any particular battle. It was just mortar fire and sniper fire, and things like that. Or we'd have a sniper, we'd get down behind the tanks and go and blow the building out,
But I'm trying to keep it clear, because at Firth there was more resistance.
Yes.
Yeah, there's pretty heavy resistance at Firth. Yeah. Can you tell me about that?
Well, it seemed like they were more organized. I guess it was the same group that hung those people. They were more Nazi-fied, and we just had more mortar fire and more flat trajectory fire.
Were you with the tanks then?
Yeah, we're
you
riding
riding tanks then?
Mm-hmm.
That was a little different day, wasn't it?
Well, a lot of times if their tank was fired on, we'd hop off of it and get behind it, and be fairly well protected, or have to get in the ditches and protect the tank.
Yeah.
Because the Germans were real clever. At each road, they would have a tank trap, where the tank couldn't get off this way, and there was a bluff that way, and they'd have a dug tank trap or posts in it, and they'd always be protected with a heavy artillery piece or a machine gun. And the minute it'd take turns. Tanks, we might have 15 or 20 of them, and you'd take turns being the lead tank, to get your butt shot off. So the minute they'd start firing, we'd hop off the tanks and get in the ditches and attack them, But it was like shooting quail then, because they always had some means to run. And you'd look, and if there would always be some place where the woods were close, and they'd make a break for it or go down the road on a bicycle. And man, that was the end of that.
Well, these Shermans?
Yes.
Yeah. What'd you think of the Sherman tanks?
We thought they were swell.
Yeah.
But they built a lot of racks on them and put a lot of sandbags on the side, especially around the side turrets, to beef them up,
Yeah, to give them a little more protection.
We'd get, I guess, 12 men up on a tank, almost a squad. We'd carry our pot for cooking off the tailgate.
You get a little more heat. Could you get heat off the engine of the tanks?
We weren't using that, no. We'd have
Okay.
a fire. We were so organized, we'd have one guy looting for eggs and chickens, or two guys, and we'd have one guy getting the fire ready and, getting the wood, and the minute we'd stop, you might be there 5 minutes, you might be there a day, but we'd be getting something ready to eat.
Everybody had their job.
Yes, yes.
Well, take me through the Firth. Firth, I know, is taken in the middle of April. I think that's what it is, and I think after that, you cross. Don't you cross the Danube after that? Not long after that.
No,
Okay.
we crossed the Main River,
Okay.
the Main, M-A-I-N.
Uh-huh.
And we had our division, you're assigned a track, on the map. And we had 4 assault crossings across that main river.
Okay.
And there was a lot of problems.
Can you tell me some of the problems?
Well, probably the worst one was at Würzburg. And that happens to be at that Würzburg castle. And the Germans caught us in, there was a railroad tunnel running parallel to the river and down to where we wanted to go. And they had the assault boats all ready. And we were going through the tunnel, and they caught us in there with 30 millimeter anti-aircraft gun, those 4 mounted gun, and they were bouncing them off the wall. We were really backing off there. But finally we got out, made the assault crossing, and I must tell you a story before that. As we were assembling it for the assault, we were way up on top of the bluff at Würzburg Castle overlooking the city. And Würzburg was a church town, they said, but it wasn't. Because you could see the military forts, and we were getting plenty of fire from them, and they resisted. And orders came down that night before the attack, and they pulled us back about 18 miles. We marched back 18 miles, and the British stream bombed them. And I watched a TV program, and they said they firebombed them, but they didn't. They used those 2,000-pound blockbusters, and they bombed the living hell out of that town. And I saw that they, we were blamed for burning a church town, but we were getting fire and resistance from them. They wouldn't give up. We had that assault coming. And so the next morning, we moved back into position. And because our anti-tank guns, we were firing across from that castle at picked targets. Very seldom do you ever do that, to get to fire a picked target. And so the program that I saw, they were chastising the United States or the British for bombing Würzburg. But it was a war town. There were forts there. There were plenty of soldiers. There was resistance. And there was no such thing as firebombing because the town didn't burn. So I don't know where they got that.
Yeah. Did you go through the castle? Was your position there near the castle?
Yeah, we were right up on the castle wall.
Oh, were you? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But we didn't get into the castle per se. They had a runway or a driveway all the way up. It was really strange.
Huh. So the British bombers had done their job. Was the resistance softened up quite a bit?
Yeah, yes. They, in fact, one of the bombs hit on this side by the castle, up above the bluff, and there were officers' quarters there, nice houses. And those blockbusters would be, about 2 houses wide and a house deep, They were big holes. I mean, they were the biggest I'd ever seen.
Wow.
And they were those British blockbusters. But then we made the assault crossing, and we got some pretty good mortar fire and machine gun fire. But after we got up the bank, I saw that gun that had caught us in there, and they had hit them with white phosphorus because their bodies were burned on the gun position. One guy's skeleton side, and we had some good looting in Würzburg there.
What'd you get in Würzburg?
One of the strangest things that ever happened in the war to me was Monahan and I were on a patrol, and we were going up this block, and there was a building like a driveway down, and like a parking garage, only not real big. And in there was a dead German soldier, and he was on his knee, and he had his hand like that, and he was dead, not bloody or wounded or blown or anything. And I couldn't figure it out, so I knocked him over, but he was just dead stiff. And in his pack, he had a can of sardines. They were from Norway. And we got looking around, and there were pieces of meat around. Some guy had blown himself up, evidently. They said his backbone was laying on the ground, and it was smelling like crap and everything. And we sat and ate those sardines right there. The best treat we had.
Well, I know I've talked to vets and say it was about trying to find out what the next meal was.
Yeah, you're always eating.
I know that was satisfying to be able to eat that.
But I've always wondered what killed that guy. He didn't have a mark on him.
Huh.
And the other one, you could see he blew himself up,
Mm-hmm. Well, so you spent some time clearing Wirksburg?
Not too much. We're on
Okay.
the road again because they kept pushing us. They kept the Germans on the run. As long as we had those tanks to ride and they had gas, we're ready.
Now, did you go from there to Munich?
I'd have to look on my list, but
Okay.
it's
It was
getting
around
close.
that period, yeah.
Yeah, but we captured Dachau before we captured Munich.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm sure of that.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. Well, if you could take me through your experience at Dachau, and if you'll begin with anything you may have heard or any knowledge you've had up to that point.
The city of Dachau, the town of Dachau, was a small country town, and it was at a wedge in the road. And I remember we were riding the lead tank, and we got some fire from the right front on the side of a hill. And we didn't know it then, but there were some SSers dug in there. So we hopped off the tank, and there was a perfect ditch leading right up that road. We crossed at those trees. I have a picture of it. And we had flat shooting right in their holes. We shot them up. There were 4 to 6 of them. And killed them all, and we went on about our business, And we stopped. They said we're going to hold up for the night, dig in. But we went in this first house, and it was a real nice looking house. And I didn't know it at the time, but that was a doctor out at the camp at Dachau. And his family, they had a sitting room, a kitchen, a basement, upstairs, and 3 or 4 bedrooms downstairs. Real nice farmhouse. And the grandmother was there, the grandfather, the daughters, and the family. There must have been 6 or 7 of them. So we ran them out of there and let them stay in the basement, And they had bacon and everything. They were cooking, frying bacon. And I never will forget the Germans counterattacked, and they were firing artillery. But anyhow, I set up a machine gun in that window, in that library. And so we went about cooking, and I started frying some bacon. And here comes some artillery in. And you're pretty safe in a house, unless it's big artillery. And one of those pieces of shrapnel went right through that frying pan, and the bacon grease caught fire on that stove and ruined our bacon grease, for frying potatoes. That put the fire out. But later on, we found out that was a doctor out at that camp. And God knows what he pulled.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the next morning, we were on the road again, and we came to the camp, and the railroad sidings and things like that. You have some of those pictures of that.
So you came up to the camp along the railroad siding?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. And to the right was the railroad, and there were marshalling yards. There must have been 7, 8 tracks across. And then the warehouses, a whole long stretch of warehouses, about 100 yards of warehouses. And that's where we first broke into the camp. And we were getting some mortar fire intermittently. And there was yelling and carrying on, and people were running, and we had a guy that came up with us, and I think he was a Hungarian. He must have been a Jew, though. And he was with our company for about 2 days. I remember I got to talk to him a little bit. He was older than me. And he carried a machine gun, a Thompson. And it was kind of strange, And so when we got in that camp, he ran in there and started shooting. He went berserk. But he must have been a Jew assigned to that. We didn't know it, But we shot anybody that was fat or, any guards or anything like that. And so we had 4 or 5 occasions. There was a moat there, and they were running, and they were killing different people, the prisoners themselves, the ones that tortured them and fed them. And you could pick them out because they were usually not fat, but healthier looking.
So there was some scattered resistance there.
Yes, they dropped some mortars in, just a token resistance.
As you approached their camp, I know you said you've noticed the rail cars. What are some other things that you noticed right away?
Well, a stink, it's a stench. But it wasn't from the gas ovens, just human stench, death stench.
And did you go and investigate the rail cars?
Yeah, there were 300, I think on one of those photographs of the amount, there were 300 rail cars full of dead. And they all looked the same. They had their striped suits on, and they died in there, starved to death. But they opened some of the doors, and our company lieutenant had a camera, and he took pictures of several of those. I have those original old little photographs of them. And they've been enlarged now.
What was the reception like from the prisoners that were in the camp?
Well, those that could walk, they're like walking skeletons, You can't believe that a person can walk that thin. It's just amazing. But the dead and things like that, and they weren't embracing us. They were just, yelling, and a lot of them were clustered up, and some of them brought some cans that they had gotten out of the German soldiers' canteen or barracks or whatever. They were like our number 10 cans. We spent a long time opening those cans. In fact, that bayonet, I wore my hands out cutting cans open. Or we didn't have can openers or anything. But it was for hours, we'd take turns.
Trying to get them some sort of food.
Mm-hmm.
Before you got to Dachau, had you heard of these sorts of places?
Not one word. Not one word. Not one word. It was funny how they barracks them, like mail slots, they're living lengthwise in a hole, 4 or 5 of them in a hole. They're all stunk and dying and dead, and crapping on themselves. Just, I guess that one day I saw more dead than the whole town of Galveston.
Yeah. Well, what are some of the other features of the camp that you remember?
Oh, we were only there we stayed there that night. Yeah, we dug in that night. But we went around, and I went and looked at the ovens. The chimneys, big stacks were there. And I looked at the ovens, and they had dead stacked to go in the ovens, and they had kind of a roller system. They'd put them on a long kind of stretcher and roll them in. But I read that was coal-fired, and they quit doing that. But I saw the gas jets. That was gas-fired. I don't know who said it was coal-fired. It might have been both, but I saw the gas jets. But there were 4 ovens that I recall, and I guess if you put 10 bodies on a roller, 4 ovens, that's 40, and if you took an hour to do it, to burn them, I try to think of how many, going 24 hours a day, how many people they could die burning there. But a lot. They had a lot stacked, ready to go.
You said there was a moat around the camp?
It wasn't quite around it. It was a lake. I assumed it was around because it was a long ditch, and there were a lot of bodies in there. They were throwing them in there.
I know there's, I think there were 7 towers or something like that around the camp. Or as far as the physical description of the camp, can you tell me what you remember as far as what it looked like?
Yeah, I remember. We didn't really inspect the perimeters so much. I knew the warehouse because we'd been in there, and the first part of the moat and the fencing. Yeah, there we saw, but it just ran down the line. The next morning, we went over to look at the front, you know, and I saw the entrance and things like that, but in some of their barracks. And the officers stayed in one compound, the enlisted men and then the prisoners in the third hole.
Did y'all capture any of the SS there?
There weren't, no, any SS we killed.
They had SS you killed?
Yeah.
Other guards?
We killed a few guards,
Mm-hmm.
but by that time, the prisoners had identified them and killed them themselves.
Killed them themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There were some pretty strong prisoners, but they had been eating good, you know. The rest of it was just a big melee, groups of, you know, insanity, I guess that's what I call it.
Yeah. What were the officers' barracks like?
I didn't look at them too
Okay.
good. They were brick buildings as far as I remember.
Now you said you dug in that night. Where did y'all stay that night?
We dug in alongside the railroad.
Okay.
It's always the best place to be.
Why is that the best place to be?
Well, it's usually pretty good digging.
Yes.
We were fortunate. I always say that because Europe was fairly fertile and good digging, you know.
Yeah. Well, you learned where good digging was and where...
It's an art.
An art you would have rather not developed. Huh?
Well, it was fun, you know.
Yeah. It was about depth and speed, right?
Yes, sir.
How deep you could dig and how fast you could dig it.
Well, a lot of times, if you were there for longer than 4 hours or maybe the next day even, your GIs are funny. You're always improving. So when you dig that hole, you dig a little shelf for your hand grenades or whatever comes out of your pockets. You put a seat in there, you know, where you sit down with your head sticking out. It's comical. And smooth the walls, nice, you know.
Well, I'd like to ask the question, because we were talking about it before we interviewed, the things that you carried with you or the things that you kept with you. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Our ammunition,
You were showing me. Yeah.
Yeah, these bills here they had a club they called a Shart Snorter. I don't know, it was just not a club to join or anything, it was just a trend. And you start out with your dollar bill and you have your people sign it, whoever wants to sign it. And then each country you come or in or trade for, you attach that and it becomes a long, this was a roll, I kept it rolled up and I kept it in my pocket all the time.
Mm-hmm. You kept adding
All
to
through
it.
the war, yeah.
Yeah. Well, you know, as you think about
One of these bills is a 500 million mark bill, and that was one of the famous bills during the inflation when they were carrying their money with wheelbarrows, you know.
Uh-huh.
But some of them are I don't suppose any of them are worth any money. But those knives and things we just picked up, you know, kind of after the war. There's my jump knife, that one that's parallel there. And that group of medals came from that major's house or general's house that I was in, looted in Würzburg before the bombing.
Okay.
And by the way, in that same house was that plaque of Hitler, Adolf Hitler,
Yes.
made by Hummel.
Yes.
And that has his signature on it too.
Yeah.
I remember it had a celluloid frame, and I kept it at my mother's. And I had an office there, you know. My mom would come and dust and everything, and I'd come home and that plaque would be down. And I'd say, Mom, why do you, she said, why do you turn that down? She said, I don't want people thinking we're Hitlers. My little mother.
Well, so you spend the night at Dachau. The next day you're there. What are you doing? I know you're not. I know the rest of the division's moving in. At that point.
We loaded out and moved out.
Yeah. Did you have many interactions with the prisoners that were there?
None.
Okay.
None. Just, you know, just look at them and see them.
Yeah. Did
They
see?
stunk and they were dirty. weren't they?
Yeah, I bet. Yeah. Did seeing that scene there change maybe how you thought about the war or what you were doing with the war, or how you thought about the enemy?
Not noticeably.
Yeah.
Not noticeably, because we were trained to kill. You know, just that's all you wanted to do is kill them. You know,
Yeah.
that's all.
Yeah.
You know, shake hands or anything like that. But
Yeah.
that's why we were trained.
The objective was the same. That didn't
Right.
change. Yeah. Yeah. Now, you left from there and you went to Munich.
Yes.
Moved on from there, which is not too far.
Yes.
Not too
It
far.
seemed like 12, 15 miles. I don't
Yeah. Yeah. Can you take me through the rest? I know we're getting towards the VE day. Yeah.
Well, Munich
Yeah.
was kind of funny. We were in the attack, and we hardly had any resistance. And we broke into the town, and all the GIs they still had their streetcars running, and everybody who could get a car had a car if they had gas, you know. And we were riding streetcars, and it was kind of fun in Munich. We were still getting some Corps artillery on us. And I remember we went to the downtown to the main Luftschutzkeller, which is the air raid shelter. And they had a kitchen set up there. Well, this was assigned in our area. And they had bean soup on the menu, and they fed the people that would be in the air raid shelter for any length of time, you know. And we had some Germans. I remember 3 of them ran in this one air raid shelter, and there were different rooms. There were like a big, nice room with benches in, and they all had metal doors. And we were looking for those Germans because they still had their guns. And I remember I had a hand grenade, and I pulled a pin out of it, and I thought they had ran in this one room. And I had Monahan open this door, and I'm ready to throw that grenade in there, and there was about 50 people in there standing with their hands up, you know. And I almost let that grenade go. And they'll never forget me. They went like that. But I didn't. I put the pin back, fortunately. But that night, we stayed in. We didn't dig in that night. And we formed a perimeter guard around the Luftschutzkeller and the kitchen. And our officer, he shot every pot, shot a hole in every pot. Couldn't cook anything. Davis, he got drunk, you know. Their Germans were looting, and they had a lot of cheese. They had a cheese warehouse right in our area, and we let them loot, and they're in there hollering, "Here comes some guy with a wheelbarrow full of cheese blocks," you know. And we let him get up to it. We kicked him out and took all his cheese. But we did things like that.
Well, I know at that point it's only really scattered resistance that you're running into.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, it was obvious at that point that it was a matter of time.
Right.
Yeah. Well, do you remember where you were and when you heard of the German surrender?
You know, I really don't. But I remember we were right at Munich, the Autobahn ran through there. And I remember we were en route to Vienna. They sent us to Vienna. And I remember the Germans marching back, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and just steady, 4 or 10 abreast, you know, and their stomp, you know, you could hear them marching and everything.
Marching back down the Autobahn?
Yes,
Oh, wow.
I don't know where in the hell they were going, but they were going.
Yeah.
And there were just thousands and thousands of them.
Well, I know the German surrender didn't mean as much to you because you didn't have enough points, right?
Yeah, I did have enough.
You did have enough by that point.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Because I had been in the United States, I had 85 or 87
Oh, that's
points.
true. Yeah.
And I had been in longer than most of the
That's
guys.
true. Since you were in 42.
And I got the Purple Heart and the Bronze Star, which is 5 points each, so it
Yeah.
was pretty good.
That's right. Yeah. So you knew you weren't
We didn't know
going
it.
to Pacific.
We didn't know anything about it at that time.
Okay.
Didn't know anything about points or anything at that time.
Okay. Okay. Now, after the surrender, where were you assigned? Where did you go from there?
Well, we were in the mountains in Bavaria,
Uh-huh.
and we were chasing SSers up in the mountains on through July. We had some pretty good shooting. And I remember my mother sent a letter, well, I'm glad you're safe and the war's over. Poor Mom. But they had a lot of people that hid up, way up in the Alps, and we had to climb to get them. And we were assigned certain areas to. When we got up there, we shot them. Most of them were SSers.
Is there small groups, small
Yes.
little bands? Yeah.
I remember we climbed for about 2 days, and it was work, but going down is where it nearly killed us. Man, the top of our feet wore off, going down.
Mm-hmm.
But we always had plenty of food, and didn't know any better.
Yeah. At that point, you were
Yeah,
well supplied. Yeah.
We relaxed.
Well, did you? I didn't ask you this question as far as. Did you consider staying in the military?
No,
No.
didn't even think about it. Could I stop to?
Oh, sure. Yeah, sure.
Have a break?
Well, I want to go back to what we were talking about in just a minute, but I'd ask you off the recording if there was any conflict among the troops.
Not later on in the war,
Yeah.
but earlier in the war.
Earlier in the war?
There was a guy by the name of Birney. I hated him. And just like kids, we finally duked it out. Nothing settled, but he got killed. He didn't get back home.
Oh, he got killed later.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Well, this work, you said you're doing this work near Innsbruck up until August of 45? Yeah.
Whenever we were moved to Vienna, I don't remember the
Okay.
exact date.
Well, of course, August 45, I think of the Japanese surrender.
Oh yes,
Yeah.
I remember that.
Yeah, tell me about that.
Well, they put us in training. We were supposed to go back over to Japan, and they put us dummies in training in perimeter defense, that jungle fighting and everything. And we ended up using real grenades and all kinds of things. And they kind of canceled that out. But we were in a town in the mountains, and it was a nice town. We were in a schoolhouse. We had bunks and everything. We were pretty comfortable. So then we went to Vienna.
Well, now, you heard of the surrender. So what was your response to the surrender?
Really, it didn't come like a climatic event,
Yeah.
Just like a progressive event,
Yeah. But you knew you were going to get to go home.
No, we were going to get to go to Japan.
Well, once you heard of the Japanese surrender,
Oh.
yeah, tell me about what you remember about that.
Well, that was joyous because we knew that was the end of the fighting and we'd get to go home.
Yeah. What did you know anything about what was going on in the Pacific?
Yeah, we had a company paper or a regimental division paper, and they called it the Stars and Stripes, and it was, it kept us up on the news, so we'd read it.
Mm-hmm.
It was, yeah.
Okay, so surrender happens, war is over, you're transferred to occupation in Vienna?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
And so what are you doing in Vienna for the next?
We're doing
Yeah.
guard duty and, just generally sharing it with the Russians and the British and the French. And we're playing cards and kind of loafing around and going down to the black market and kind of exploring Vienna itself. And,
Did you have much interaction with the Russians?
Yeah, a little bit. They, a carton of cigarettes would cost us 50 cents. And we could buy as many cartons as you wanted, you know, and we could sell them to the Russians for $10. But the Russians, President Roosevelt had given the Russians our plates, these little blue units here, that's invasion money.
Okay.
And that was currency to us. That's what we'd be paid in and everything, you know. And to the Russians, Roosevelt gave them the same plates, and they printed money, you know, just going out of style. And the Russian officers would have briefcases full. They could buy a tank, a Jeep, or anything they wanted, you know. And we'd sell them old clothes and everything. They'd buy anything. And some of them were pretty well skilled, but the Russian soldier was just, they had smocks on and they had, you know, trailings of dirt and everything and food, and they're kind of lower life, I'd say.
They were farmers, right? They're just all farmers.
Cavemen, I think.
Yeah. So what did you think of Vienna? You said you got an opportunity to explore Vienna.
Yeah, we went to the Ring, the popular downtown area, and we used to go down to Karlsplatz, which was a park with statues and things, but that's where the main black market was, and we would sell things down there.
What were you getting on the black market?
$10 a carton for cigarettes.
Oh, okay, that's
or
where
a pair of shoes or whatever, you know.
Yeah. You know, I've learned through this, you're enterprising.
Yeah, well, I've always been hustling around trying to get a buck together.
Ever since you had the bank with the little key at the bottom,
Yeah.
you've been hustling it too. So you said you were there in Vienna until it started to turn cold.
And then the points took effect, and I was transferred to that Yankee division, and they were picked to go home.
Okay.
And they sent us to France to one of those cigarette camps. They had a Pall Mall, Lucky Strike, you know. They made these big camps, tent camps, waiting to go. So we could have either gone over to England and got on the Queen Mary and been home in, 5 days or something like that, or gone down the Mediterranean. So we ended up down in the Mediterranean at sea in the North Atlantic in November, you know, in December. It was pretty rough.
Yeah, you said it was a tougher passage back.
I know it.
Yeah.
I know it.
Yeah. Just the cold.
Well, it was they cut across the North Atlantic, you know, and it was rougher, much rougher. They couldn't even have movies on, you know. It was storming. And we were in a troop, a victory ship then, I think, coming back.
And you came back to, where did you come back to?
Newport News, because I wanted to go back down to parachute school, because I knew some people down there, and I was discharged from there.
Okay.
And I spent a couple weeks, you know, fooling around down there. My mother said, "Bud, when are you coming home?" I said, "I'll be home tomorrow," or something like that.
And tell me about the reception back in St. Louis.
Well, our front door is always open. We had a nice residence, you know, on a corner. And I opened the door and I saw my sister, and I had on civilian clothes. And she said, my sister called and my mother and said, "Mom, Bud doesn't have on his soldier suit." That was my reception.
So you said you had 3 sisters?
Yes.
3 sisters at the time. And did you take up a job there in St. Louis?
Yes, my one sister, Jane, she was in the real estate business and bought her own office, had her own real estate and insurance office, and she was doing quite well. And so I was an insurance or a real estate salesman for her.
Oh, okay.
And I didn't like that very well. we were fooling around then, you know.
Did you go back to Washington University?
Yes, later
Yeah.
on.
Later on you did. On the GI Bill?
Yeah, I fooled around, $30 for 30 months or something, or $300 for 30 months. Or it lasted for a year that they gave you separation pay, you know.
Uh-huh.
We kind of fooled around, becoming reacclimated.
Well, now, what did you end up making your career as?
My expertise is in design and layout of restaurants, and I've sold restaurant equipment for 60 some years, I guess.
So how'd you come to that?
That's an interesting question. One of my girlfriend's father owned a company in St. Louis. It's called Durochrome, and they manufactured furniture, bar furniture and tables and chairs. And I got interested in that, went from there.
I see. Because you were interested in her?
Yes.
Yeah. So, but the profession stayed, but the girl didn't.
Yes, we parted our ways.
Okay.
At that point. I went to work for the May Company, and it was part of our retailing curriculum, and as sales personnel and buying personnel for Famous and Bar in St. Louis.
But your real love in that was design. You
Yeah.
like design more
Yeah.
than anything. What is it that you liked about doing design work? Or you're continuing to do design work?
Well, I don't know, you attain a certain knowledge, you know, I don't have to refer to books, and I remember dimensions, and I do all the engineering for electric outlets and the piping and things like that. It's simple for me because I don't have to refer to books.
Yeah.
And usually engineering companies will hire me for that, doing that restaurant layout. I did the Astro Hall, by the way, for Burns and Delat.
Mm-hmm. Well, and now, how'd you end up in Texas?
I had a company in St. Louis with a partner, and it was called Mark Emmett Sales. We sold restaurant equipment throughout the Midwest. And then I opened an office in Topeka, Kansas. And my partner, we sold out. And I had my own company in Topeka, and I did a business throughout the Midwest there, Nebraska and Missouri and Oklahoma and Kansas. And I decided at some point that one of the executives for the Fleming Company that were customers had a place down in Galveston here. And we came down to visit it and became enthralled with the area and decided to sell my business. And so I reopened a business here.
Now, was that in '86?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, '86, and that's when you came down to
October '86.
Yeah, yeah. And it was a good move for you.
Yeah, we did good business, and I became a millionaire. I remember my banker said, well, how does it feel to be a millionaire? Well, my mother-in-law soon took care of that because we got a divorce. And I can't say anything bad about my wife, but it just cost a lot of money. I had to split everything. I had to sell a business, my building, things like that, my home. My one daughter came to live with me, Jamie. We had a good life.
Now, when did you get up to Seabrook?
I moved here after we sold a house in Galveston.
I see. Okay.
But I rented a couple places, you know, and finally this went on the market, and it was a good bargain. So Jamie lived with me then. It's a lot bigger than I need, you know. I hardly go in some of the rooms sometimes.
Yeah. Well, a couple questions I'd like to go back and ask you, and since this project in particular is interested in your liberation experience, what has it been like? I know at the time you didn't really know what was going on. You were just doing your job and trying to survive and get through the war. But as you thought back over the years, what has it meant for you to know that you were involved in liberating a camp like Dachau?
Well, I think, going back fundamentally, I think I was given I don't have much fear. And it's a strange thing. My mother always said that, and I didn't realize it. But even in combat, I was never afraid. You duck, for it's under shell fire. And I kind of enjoyed it. But I kind of saw it as outside myself. A strange phenomenon. And I don't think that really combat affected me. I guess it did because, the post-traumatic stress now and everything. But it just it was kind of a phenomenon, I think.
Well, I know for some liberators, the things that they saw, particularly in the camps, they talk about how it was different than the field of battle.
Well, certainly.
Yeah.
But some of the things that you don't realize, that it always makes you wonder, how could human beings do that to human beings? But worse than killing, is the deprivation that he inflicted upon those people by starving to death, the misery over years and years and years. And that I haven't ever come to grips with. The other thing is that each one of those prisoners had a bucket or a can, and that was their ditty bag. That's what they carried. They ate out of it, they shit in it, they peed in it, and they didn't have any place to wash it, And the privation that he inflicted, or they inflicted, not he, they, because there were plenty of people to blame, because a blind man would see what was going on.
Well, I know I've heard many vets say that too, because the citizens that they ran into said they didn't know.
That's, that denial is not appropriate all the time.
And speaking of denial, there are others that would say, and I know you've spoken of this before, those that would deny that whole experience.
Yeah, like Demashot. It's they do that for a reason.
Yeah.
It's impossible to deny.
Yeah. Well, Mr. Havey, is there some things I should have asked you about that I didn't ask you about? What did we miss?
I can't think of anything right at this time, but I'll probably think of something later.
Okay. Well, if you think of it, you want to get it in, we'll get it in.
Okay.
Robert, do you have any questions you wanted to ask?
Did you cover the city?
He didn't.
Oh.
Yeah.
Then I'm good.
Okay. Well, Mr. Havey, I want to thank you for sitting down with me today, and I want to thank you for your service to our country. And it was an honor to get to visit with you today.
Thank you.